We've heard the topic of culture come out a lot in the first two sessions. Alex Dmitriev spoke about it. The last General Counsel panel spoke heavily about culture. And this session is designed specifically to address some of those cultural elements. And we have a tremendously diverse representation of companies for the next session. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jean-Marc Levy to facilitate the discussion on company culture.
Great. So I'm thrilled to be here this morning, as Kevin said, with a very, very diverse group of cultural experts to have a discussion about organizational DNA and the importance of culture. I think the simple fact that we're here today on this stage talking about culture speaks volumes about the way corporate America is rethinking the importance of values, culture, behaviors, and it's no surprise, and most of you know that in 2014, Merriam-Webster named culture its word of the year, and that says a lot, especially if you think about what the word of the year was in 2015, which was ism. Ism as in racism, socialism, and so the importance of those cultural, values-based attributes is clearly becoming a part of the zeitgeist to an extent that we can't ignore it anymore in corporate America. And to talk about this today, we have Melissa Barnes from Eli Lilly. She's the Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer and Senior Vice President of Enterprise Risk Management. Thanks for joining us. Amin Thor, who's the head of Global Compliance and Integrity for LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us. Bob Bostrom, who is the Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary for Abercrombie and Fitch. And last but not least, Brian Beagley, who is the VP of Compliance for Johnson Controls. So great diversity of company and individuals. So going back to Merriam-Webster, the definition of culture that you find in the dictionary is it's a way of thinking, behaving, or working that exists in a place or an organization, such as a business. And so, in short, it's all about values and behaviors. That's what constitutes culture. So nothing really new here. And I think that especially over the past 3, 4, 5 years, that's becoming a widely accepted concept, even within the corporate boardrooms and corporate America. But why is the topic receiving such attention now? Why is such a focus on culture? It's because while it's always been important, we now know, and there is a lot of empirical data that actually supports the fact that values drive behaviors, and behaviors drive outcomes. And those outcomes can be as diverse as the level of innovation within a corporation, the financial performance within a corporation, as well as the rate of misconduct within an organization. So with outcomes as varied as these, it becomes absolutely critical for leaders to have not only their finger on the pulse of what constitutes culture within their organization, but how to inspire and influence it. So I'm going to start with this very short exercise for everyone here. For about a minute, I would like everybody to think about, including my esteemed panelists, think about the one or two key behaviors or values that you would like to most represent your company culture. Whether it's really there or not yet, what are the one or two key values or behaviors you would like to truly represent who you are as an organization and as your culture? And while everybody's thinking, I'm going to ask Melissa.
Jeez. Well, I would start with, on May 10th of this year, Eli Lilly and Company will celebrate its 140th anniversary as a company. And it was started 140 years ago by Colonel Eli Lilly, and he did it with 3 core values in mind. integrity, excellence, and respect for people. So I think if anything, we consider our heritage a differentiator in many respects. So I couldn't answer that question without referencing the core values of our company. That said, if I put Melissa Barnes' spin on it, I think the courage to speak up. I think the speak up culture is a learning culture. I think Alex so aptly put it this morning. As long as we employ human beings, we're going to have problems to address. But we rely on the 40,000 employees of Eli Lilly and Company to speak up and let us know what's really happening. And that kind of culture is something that we continue to strive for and get better at in the spirit of continuous improvement. I would also say in our industry and in our company in particular, it would be a passion for the patient.
Okay.
Because to the extent that you have the patient in the room making those decisions with you, right, metaphorically, of course, 99.9% of the time you're going to get it right from an integrity and ethical standpoint. So having a passion for the patient and really being engaged and motivated, inspired by the patient is key to integrity at our company.
So I'm going to write down integrity and passion, and we'll come back to that.
Okay.
What about you, Amin?
Okay. What struck me with her comment there was that she prefaced it with the heritage of Eli Lilly. LinkedIn does not have a 140-year history. We have a 5-year history as a public company, and so our culture is still being formed. And two of our cultural tenets, two of our values that I think are most important to us are these concepts of members first. Members first to us means what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to make LinkedIn valuable for our members? And that helps us put a longer-term view on the things that we're doing rather than a short-term view. And we've only had a short-term existence, so that's something that's really challenging for us as a business, is to think for the long term and the long haul. In the Valley, the long haul means usually a year or two out, but we're trying to think even further than that. So that's one thing that I think is really important for us as a company, is to really embrace this concept of members first. And then I think one part of our values that really resonates with me is this concept of taking intelligent risks. As a Silicon Valley company, we're supposed to be a disruptive company. We're supposed to take big risks for big payouts. And that's the mentality that prevails in the Valley. What I like to focus on is the intelligent part of the risks, and how we can train and help educate our teams to take those intelligent risks and build into their ROI calculations our risks around ethics, integrity, reputation.
Great. Bob?
So I guess I'd offer maybe 3 swing thoughts. Do the right thing, respect for people, and kind of, I think not unique to Abercrombie, probably a very common theme of all culture and value statements is protect your brand. And if you can convince people that by doing the right thing, by speaking up, by having respect for people, that you enhance the life and the integrity of the brand, goes a long way toward getting we call them associates, our associates to do the right thing, not in the abstract, but to protect the brand. And we happen to have, maybe 60,000 full-time employees, but probably 160,000 employees in total, a lot of part-time store associates. So conveying that message out, and the core Abercrombie employee is probably 26 years old, probably much like your demographic. Mm-hmm. They love the Abercrombie brand. They eat, sleep, drink, they wear the clothes. And so they're drinking the Kool-Aid about the brand. So it's a very easy message for them to appreciate. If I want to protect this brand, if I want to protect the moose, the seagull, I've got to do the right thing. I've got to speak up. I've got to have the right approach to people both within and without the company.
Thank you. Brian?
Thank you. Similar to Eli Lilly, Johnson Controls has been around for 130 years. And our founder, Warren Johnson, said 130 years ago, we are known in this town as honest and reliable manufacturers. And I think that sentiment, I think that culture has carried through these past 130 years. I think it'll continue for the next 130 years as well. And in addition to the comments that I would echo here among the panel, in particular is the concept of the speak-up culture. And I know we've talked about that. Alex Dimitrieff talked about that earlier. I think that is so critical to the culture of an organization because in many ways, as hierarchical organizations, we're almost predisposed not to have a speak-up culture. And it's a very difficult thing to drive through an organization and to really get it right. We're like every other company. We're trying to get it right. We've got a lot of efforts around a speak-up culture, and our company, like all of the companies represented here, represented out in the audience, are dynamic. Your cultures are constantly changing, whether it's through acquisitions, mergers, divestitures. But that thread, if you can keep those threads of your culture in place, that's what's critical and most important.
So now let's skip to the second part of the exercise, and that's where I want everybody to think about the attributes and the behaviors and values they thought of. I'm going to ask you guys, if you were to triple everybody's salaries at your companies today, everyone across the board, would you have more integrity, more respect for people than you have today?
We might have higher engagement scores. But,
Short term.
Okay, short term, great answer. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Or if you took two of your most difficult employees and locked them into a room and say, you two are not coming out of this room until you respect each other. How would that work out? Not so great, I believe. So what we're really saying is we're saying that the old traditional models of management and corporate governance and behavior, the motivating with compensation, that may work very short term or temporarily or not at all. The old model of coercion, command and control, that's definitely not going to work when it comes to culture. So it's all about really finding ways to influence and inspire your colleagues, your employees, to really want to adhere to this moral code and those values. And that's why we have people like you guys focusing so heavily on what it takes to actually affect that kind of change in a culture. And that's why we're here today on this stage, because it's really hard. And so while the data tells us that it's vitally important, we're still collectively trying to figure out how to do it. So having said that, I want to ask all of you the same question, which is, one of the things that we see all the time is the fact that while the very senior leaders in an organization do believe that they understand their company's culture and what it really means and how to influence it, there is a real disconnect between what the senior leaders believe or think and what is actually happening within your organization. How does that manifest itself in all of your companies?
Well, I would say that I don't think there's any substitute for what I call meaningful presence, okay, and trying to assess a culture. So we sell our products in 120 countries around the world, and I think cultures vary from affiliate to affiliate, and in some instances, even within the same building, function to function, right? So you have various things to work with. When I say meaningful presence, I mean that we have an ethics and compliance professional in every affiliate in which we do business, and they sit on the lead team, and they speak the language, and they know the business as well as their business folks. And those folks report independently up through my line. So we have sort of eyes and ears on the ground. Likewise, we do a number of the things that I know have been referenced this morning. We measure, we do surveys, we work hard to get there, but and do assessments. But there's no substitute to actually just getting out and having a feel for what's happening in the organizations. I don't think you can leave it to chance. I don't think you can rely on what you think is happening as you sit in your ivory tower at Corporate Center. I think you have to purposefully go out and employ whatever works within your company to monitor and assess what's happening in the real world.
Do you view as one of your responsibilities the role of messaging and translating that back to the rest of the senior leadership team?
Absolutely, and if I didn't have a senior leadership team that was very interested in that, in those facts and data, then I would be very concerned about my senior leadership team. I think it's something that's incredibly important, and it's not just in our business, but I would say especially in our business, that how we do what we do is as important as what we deliver.
So what about you, Amin? We know that Reid Hoffman and Jeff Weiner and are very, very focused and have written a lot about the LinkedIn culture. And how close are they to what is really the LinkedIn culture? How much of... Are there any gaps?
You know, it's a good question, but I think what's really interesting about the industry and the type of workforce that we have, if you have a lot of millennials in your organization, what you quickly realize is that they have no notion of hierarchy. They say what's on their mind, and they're not afraid to speak up and question decision-making at the highest levels. And so the interesting thing about Jeff and Reid is they really put their investments in creating this transparent culture. So at LinkedIn, for example, every 2 weeks, our executive management team, led by our CEO, gets up for an all-hands. And every 2 weeks, they present our operating strategy to the business at large. Everybody participates across the globe. And at the end of that session, there's a question and answer period. Any employee can get up and ask a question. And so I think that gives us a real-time pulse on what's going on in the business. And just in our last meeting, I remember there was an employee who got up who actually questioned an acquisition strategy that we had. We just bought this company, and they started questioning why we did this, right? And so I think that's a testament to that openness and transparency that we all want in the business. But it also creates a lot of accountability on part of the executives, because they have to answer to the employees, right? And talent is our number one operating priority, and we're in a fiercely competitive market for talent. So we actually have to keep our employees happy. So if they question our decision-making, then we're in trouble. So we are held accountable because of this transparency and because of our employees' willingness to question everything, including what's served at lunch at our cafes. It's ridiculous.
And I've been there. It's quite good, actually. So I have no complaints. Bob?
Well, I would echo much of what Min just said. Our corporate headquarters base maybe has 4,000 people. I kiddingly say to people from the East Coast, where I came from, that without too much exaggeration, 90% of them are probably under the age of 27. They're literally 2 years out of college, maybe a year out of college. They are really very much, as you said, they are very willing to challenge authority. There's no hierarchy. The modern-day founder of Abercrombie, when it emerged from bankruptcy as being a fly fishing, safari expedition company since 1892, since we're all throwing our heritage around. But the modern-day Abercrombie really is from 96-ish, when it was spun out of L Brands, which is a Victoria's Secret empire, into this erotic, sensual, very youth-oriented, cool culture, both in terms of the customers, the product, and the employees. And Michael Jeffries was really an icon in the space for a long time. And that was very much his approach to life. Although when he left at the end of 14, he was 71 probably, he acted like he was 27. He acted like the millennials that he attracted. He was very much the spirit of the company, the culture of the company. He very much engaged, empowered, and co-opted everybody that was there. You had people who were, literally 25, 26, 27, making multi-million-dollar decisions with no life experience, but it was a very empowering culture. So I think that certainly compared with my prior experiences at Freddie Mac, where I was general counsel through the financial crisis, or a large bank before then, like night and day, not even night and day, like different solar systems. A much different approach to life. And so the way that you try to engage and co-opt these people into a culture of compliance. They're willing to speak up, but they need help in understanding what they should be speaking up about. And that's probably our biggest challenge.
I would start by saying that if we're going to talk about culture, and I think in our compliance programs and as compliance professionals, we talk about culture constantly, but I'm not quite sure we fully understand what that means. And if you look out at, and I think you've mentioned some of the research that's out there in terms of cultural indicators, companies like Johnson Controls and many of the companies here in this room, we don't have a single culture. There are multiple cultures, and if your company is like my company, I can tell a big difference between our automotive business and our energy storage business and our building business. They have very distinct cultures. Overlaying that is the Johnson Controls culture, with integrity as its core values, and many of the other things that you would expect from a large global multinational, including leadership expectations, our mission, our vision, and values. However, if you go and talk to the experts, principally in academia and in other areas, and even go and talk to your human resources department, they'll talk about the same thing. They'll talk about this concept of ecosystems, which is a collection of cultures that are kind of bound together. And when they talk about these ecosystems, you'll hear the phrases formal and informal systems. And what does that mean? The formal systems are many of the programs and things that we are all involved with. It's our compliance program, it's the training, it's the policies and procedures, it's the communication, it's the investigations and the helpline. It's your values, stated values as a company. It's your HR policies and procedures. Those are all critical, those are all necessary. We have to have those, right? Especially if we're going to drive a company type of culture. The informal systems are what actually drive behavior day to day. And I think it was mentioned earlier, it's that direct manager, that supervisor, which has a disproportionate impact on that informal system. So, Jean-Marc, to answer your question, to the extent that those formal systems and those formal systems are out of alignment, it doesn't necessarily mean misconduct is going to happen, but the probability that something's going to happen, and as Alex Dimitrieff said this morning, we all make mistakes, we all have issues and challenges that we're dealing with. So I think a big part of our role as compliance professionals is not to just talk about culture, but to really understand it and to focus on those things that help bring alignment between those formal and informal systems.
So one of the things that you guys all said in different ways is the need to either have systems or frameworks or activities that foster and promote the right culture or behaviors. So one of the new trends that we're starting to see is the emergence of the Chief Culture Officer role. So literally a couple of days ago, SeaWorld, company that has had some real issues over the past year, announced that they were starting a retained search for a Chief Culture Officer. So what are you're shaking your head, I can tell already, Melissa.
I believe in transparency.
You believe in transparency, that's great. And so does that make sense to you, or is it just a manifestation of companies that are undergoing some sort of transition or difficult time? What is there a role for a Chief Culture Officer?
I think it's an impossible job in many respects, because a culture by definition is made up of, is a sum of its parts, if you will. Everyone has to be a Chief Culture Officer in many respects, right? So it has to be bottom up, top down. I get the idea of elevating the concept. So this is probably heresy in this room, but I hate the word compliance. I'm not sure it's something to aspire to. I don't know that anyone seeks to be compliant someday, right? I mean, you have to be, whereas I think integrity, ethics is something that you absolutely do aspire to. And you can't have integrity without compliance, but you can certainly be compliant without having integrity. And so I think it's raising the level of the kinds of jobs that the folks in these rooms do to the higher level concept. I absolutely get that. But to suggest that one person has the key to the culture, I think is naive.
What do you think? Is Reid Hoffman the Chief Culture Officer at LinkedIn?
I don't think so, but I do think he has outsized influence in formulating the tight-knit culture that LinkedIn began with. But much like Melissa, I don't believe that it sits with one person, and it evolves over time. And I see culture as if you personify a company, the company's personality is its culture, right? And so it takes everybody to build that personality and make that personality interesting and something to be admired. And so it's not just one person that does it, although there are different people in the organization that have soapboxes that they can stand on to talk about their culture. So I think we all play a role.
What do you think, Bob?
I think there has to be a cultural process, right? Whether it's overseen or directed or orchestrated or coordinated by a single person would work. We're engaged in a very deliberate attempt to rebrand Abercrombie & Fitch and to transform the culture. Very, very deliberate efforts. We have retained an outside firm that has been doing consumer research, customer research, to create new brand convictions and new brand DNA for both the Hollister and Abercrombie & Fitch brands. Fascinating research in terms of what do our customers, and our customers range from 11 to 23, 24. And our workforce ranges from, as I said before, 24 to 30 primarily. And even the divergence between that group and our customers and non-customers vary dramatically. But we're very near reaching some conclusions about what it should look like. And that is part of a process that's also going on with a group of, actually 3 groups of 5 kind of VP level folks who are also engaged in revisiting our values, our value statement, which has existed since the days of Mike Jeffries, who was a very imperial CEO, to say the least. So that's going on in coordination with this effort to restate, redo our mission and values internally, which also go externally, as well as a whole designed attempt to come up with a new usable, friendly code of conduct, not to use the word we all don't like to use, but a new compliance culture, ethical culture. And so someone needs to coordinate those efforts as you try to transform your brand. And in our case, it's kind of done by a small committee. But I could see where if somebody were empowered to be that committee, to engage in that range of activities, and then come back and make a presentation, it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing. And also to have accountability going forward in terms of how do we, it's easy to say what it should be, it's the how that's the really hard part. And maybe that should be a full-time job. Maybe that should be a full-time job for a number of people. But I could see where, especially given where we are and what we're trying to do, we're having a person or persons charged with accountability for the how part of that process would not necessarily be a bad thing.
I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong answer here. I think decisions like this of having a chief culture officer are highly firm specific, and I guess maybe in a twist of irony, it depends upon the culture as to whether or not a position like that is the right thing. In a company like Johnson Controls, I don't think it would necessarily be a good position. We're so diversified. We operate in over 100 countries throughout the world, and where we place a lot of focus and emphasis on our program is around our regional compliance committees, which are by business unit. So we have multiple compliance committees within each region. And then attached to each of those compliance committees is what you would know as a compliance liaison. We refer to them as geographic program leads. Those are actually people who sit in the business. They're from the business. They work in the business. Yes, they have responsibilities for helping us to drive the compliance program. But those are the individuals that, in my opinion, they're the ones who have their pulse. They feel what's going on in that organization. They understand the dynamics. They understand the ecosystems. They understand the subtle cultural difference between our automotive business in Plymouth, Michigan versus our automotive business in Burscheid, Germany. They're different. And so we rely heavily upon a more distributed type of organization to help us better understand what the issues and the challenges are within our organization.
If I could just mention one more thing. The other part of that process that I neglected to mention is we've created a brand image committee, which is comprised of mid-level people in the organization, from the merchant side, from the legal side, compliance side, diversity side, maybe most importantly, and HR side. And the role of that committee is to review new products that have a message on them. So a big part of our business is graphic T-shirts. If you look historically at the A&F graphic T-shirt history, it's laden with young designers making really poor decisions about what to put on a product, right?
But
they sell. And so originally this started out as literally called the Decency Committee, which was run by lawyers to really ensure that the graphic T-shirts were legally decent within the legal definition of the meaning and wouldn't get us sued. But it's now broadened as part of this cultural transformation process to review it for things that people just might not find appropriate. But it's part of transforming the brand, building the brand. And it goes back to 15 years ago, A&F did a T-shirt that said 2 Wongs don't make a white, and it had the image of 2 Orientals on the shirt. Dumb, dumb, and dumber, right? Those kinds of things, and now they're much more subtle that happen. But it's really critical in our business that some group look at what's coming out of these young designers and young merchants, because they are very young. They don't have good judgment. They don't have life experience. And they're probably not even really thinking of the sales part of it. They're just thinking it's cool and kids will wear it.
And that's interesting because it also obviously has business ramifications, right? Because the fact that a statement might be a little bit offensive is part of the brand.
Yeah, or just images. So one recent controversy we had internally was historically the A&F graphic tees were very Native American focused. Redskins, Indians with headdresses on, Native American wear, and some of our best-selling stuff. The last 3 or 4 years, as you know, Native Americans have become a much more sensitized group. You have the Washington Redskins fight, other events that have occurred. So the brand image committee now is dealing with, should we kind of ratchet this down a little bit? Yep. They may sell well, they may not be necessarily offensive or illegal, but is that kind of where we want to be out in the public space? Yep. And it kind of gets into doing the right thing, and that becomes a big part of the conversations we have. Is this the right thing for the brand?
That's a great point, right? I think as a company, to galvanize the company, you want to know what you stand for as a company. And if it might sell well, that's not a great answer, because that's not what's going to attract employees to stay with the company, or employees to come to the company if they don't believe in what you do. And in a highly competitive talent market, you need to be able to attract people who believe in what you do as a company, and that's where culture comes in.
Completely. So one of the reasons I was so excited about doing this panel is that you all represent some very, very different organizations and cultures. So I want to start digging a little deeper about some of the specific things that you're doing at your respective organizations. Starting with you, Melissa, you're working on something that's very near and dear to our hearts, which is the whole concept of simplification, right? And so what we hear, particularly in heavily regulated industries, is that some of the required behaviors, some of the reporting requirements create a lot of noise around really driving a culture of key values and ethics. So tell us a little bit more about the whole concept of simplification.
Sure. So not unlike many in our industry, we've, for a variety of reasons, found ourselves with a whole morass of policies and procedures that honestly had got to the point where it was completely unwieldy. So at Eli Lilly and Company, the mission of ethics and compliance is to drive the integration of high performance and high integrity. And the only way you can do that is to be engaging and be helpful, right? And what we had found is that our policy structure and the content of our policies had gotten to the point where they were a source of frustration as opposed to being a helpful resource. And again, that came from a variety of causes, but and heavy regulation being one of them. I say we're one of the most regulated industries in the world, and we should be, given what we do and what we're asking patients to do with our products. So we embarked on a journey that we're now in the final stages, so we can see a light at the end of the tunnel. It's been a 2-year journey where we sought to simplify our policies and our structures. The root cause, I believe, honestly, looking back now, is that our policies were written at a time when we were trying to get ourselves out of a hole, right? We were responding to a lapse in judgment, and many of our policies were written by lawyers. I can say this, I'm a lawyer. Not always the best folks to be writing policies, by the way, and they were written for an external audience. They were written to withstand government scrutiny, if you will. And that, as a result, they were hundreds of pages. They were cross-referenced. They were filled with defined terms. They were probably very legally sound, and certainly were legally sound, but mere mortals couldn't understand them, right? I mean, they read like the tax code. And so we set about rewriting our policies and doing it in a way, and I took some pages from my marketing colleagues. I mean, we considered the audience, right? And we actually pulled together focus groups and tested, for the first time as far as I can tell, our policies in the same way we would test marketing materials or advertising materials to ensure that employees were engaged. And I know that sounds crazy to be engaged by policies, but we tried to write the policies in a way that were inspiring and included with every policy a why statement, why it mattered to our mission, why it mattered to our patients. And I will tell you that we're now 18 months in, we're 6 months away from turning on across the world our last batch of these policies that of course have to be localized, the policies and procedures have to be localized across the world. And it is getting rave reviews from employees. Employees can find the policies, they understand them, they're governed in a way that makes sense. And it really has been something that helps us plant a seed for culture change, right? So it gets to a principles-based versus a rules-based culture, getting people to focus on doing the right thing, making the right judgment, as opposed to looking for the loophole in the rule. And I think that's the great fallacy of a rules-based structure. People feel good being able to point to things within the 300 pages. But I think that's false comfort, right? Because what you're unintentionally doing, I believe, is teaching people to look for loopholes, as opposed to having the higher level conversation of principles and helping people, coming alongside those folks to help them make the right judgment. So you can't just go from a rules-based culture to a principles-based culture and expect employees to be able to follow along with you, right? You have to go with job aids and communications and training that all built toward helping employees live up to the principles that you just laid out. So it is it's a journey we've just begun. Again, we've been at it for a couple of years, but we've just scratched the surface. I mean, this is something, again, in the spirit of continuous improvement that we'll be working on for decades to come. And I really do believe it's one of those things that gets me excited. It kind of ignites my passion a little, because I do think it's something that will, over time, change the culture.
How hard was it to actually inventory and document all the policies? I'm sure everybody in this room is thinking the same thing.
It literally has been a team of folks working full-time to run the project. That's not to mention all of the resources that it takes across the geographies to actually localize, right, the procedures and policies around the world, to make them live and work where we are actually doing our work. So it's a tremendous effort. It's not for the faint of heart, and you will hit speed bumps along the way. That said, there's been nothing else, I would say, in the history of our ethics compliance program that has energized the employees at Eli Lilly and Company around this subject. So it's a platform for communication campaigns. It's a platform for speak up campaigns. We've just recently started one, because you know, again, you're asking employees. People think they want, by the way, they think they want a principles-based approach and a judgment-based approach until they actually have to make a judgment, right?
Yeah.
And they don't have something to point to in the code to make them feel better about it. That's the point around it. You really have to amp up your communications and make it very clear that you want people to ask questions. You want people to raise concerns, and approach it in a very deliberate way, because you have to bring them along with you, right, to make it work.
That's awesome. So let's go from the 140-year-old company to the 5-year-old company. Your title is amazing. You lead global compliance and integrity. That is so awesome.
I got to pick it.
You got to pick it. That's great. Now, clearly, we've spoken about the fact that you're operating in a really fast-moving tech culture. You have to promote innovation, taking risks. How do you kind of balance making sure that people take enough risk? You talked about intelligent risks earlier in the conversation. How do you teach people what it means to take intelligent risks?
So what's interesting for us is, we've already checked the box on simplification at LinkedIn, and we want to get to sophistication because we just don't have those policies and procedures in place. And so when you're trying to train your employees about taking the right risks, what you have to lean on actually is your principles and your culture. And so what we've really done is we've glommed onto our culture, and everything that we do is spoken in terms of culture, values, rather than policy. And so we're light on policy, heavy on culture, and we spend a lot of time and effort saying, okay, how do you operationalize this concept of integrity? How do you operationalize this concept of members first? And we give you the tools to do that and examples to do that, to showcase and illuminate what that means to you, so that you can do your job. So our focus really is on helping people understand what our culture and our values are, rather than spending a lot of time writing policy and procedure, because it just doesn't fly in our culture, and we recognize what flies and what doesn't fly.
And so what you said you give them tools. What kind of tools do you give employees to help them figure some of those things out?
Sure. So I'll give you something that just came up in the last couple of days. We have a lot of customers, because we're in hyper-growth mode, or we're growing very rapidly. I joined 2 years ago, and there were about 5,000 employees. Now we have 10,000 employees. So we're trying to grapple with the scale and growth of our company. And so we're also a talent company, right? So we know how to recruit people. So we have a lot of customers who come back to us and says, hey, we don't like that you're poaching all our employees, stop it, right? And so our teams who believe in this concept of members first are like, okay, what can we do to placate this customer who lost, X or Y number of employees to us, right? They are thinking in terms of values, right? Like members first, how do we keep our members happy, right? But what they don't understand is, okay, well, there's maybe some antitrust or competition implications here, right? Like you cannot restrain this labor market, and frankly, that's what our business is about, is right, creating a marketplace for labor, right? And so what we have to do in those circumstances is not necessarily create an antitrust policy. It's to provide questions and answers and sample responses to our teams on how they can respond to their customers in a way that's empathetic and sympathetic to them, but still outlines our commitments and our values as a members first company,
Sure.
as somebody who believes, as a company that believes in talent.
So for you, Bob, you talked a lot about the challenge of inspiring millennials, right? And clearly the millennial generation is getting a lot of attention. There's a lot more research and data coming out. And one piece that came out that's a little less spoken about than some of the other attributes is the fact that one of the things that characterize the millennials is that they haven't had a lot of experience with failure, and that they're not very resilient when it comes to failure. Meaning, if something doesn't work out, they kind of go somewhere else and try something else, okay? So how do you reconcile that with what you were saying a little bit earlier about giving 27-year-olds with very little life experience the power of making multi-million-dollar decisions, knowing that they may do something that's not going to work out and leave a mess for people to clean up?
There's a great expression in Washington that you can ask for approval or ask for forgiveness. And I think by creating a culture of asking for forgiveness, you help to overcome that natural inclination against failure. So there's both, the internal feeling of failure and then the external consequences or repercussion of failure. So historically, at A&F, young people making poor decisions wouldn't have external consequences. They'd be commended, they'd be coached, they'd be mentored, and encouraged to continue doing it. So that's a big part of it. One thing I'd like to just add, and it's less of a prospective how-to, but more of an affirmation of much of what's been talked about here. I taught a course on the lessons from the financial crisis in 2008. And what I did was to go back to Enron and progeny pre-Sarbanes, and I literally read the multiple thousand-page reports of Enron, the report of the investigation of Enron, of MCI, WorldCom, the major corporate crises that occurred between Sarbanes and Dodd-Frank, and then everything subsequent to Dodd-Frank. And that meant the Lehman Brothers trustee report, the MF Global report, the whole progeny of this stuff that was out there. And fascinatingly, and even I haven't seen the Volkswagen one, but I did look at the GM one. And fascinatingly enough, maybe 20 repeated common root causes were in every single one of those reports. All culture. Not doing the right thing. Everybody else is doing it. It must be okay. Literally quotes in all those reports from senior level employees who made these same type of cultural, ethical value statements. And the message there is you can't legislate behavior away. You've got to create an environment and convey a message where people understand they should do the right thing. There won't be negative consequences for doing the right thing. I did a wonderful slide of a series of Amy who's walking off a cliff. The everybody else is doing it theme. But it was incredible that those same 20 cultural values emerged in every single one of those reports, notwithstanding repeated attempts to legislate against it. And it gets to your concept of principles-based compliance. The best policy in the world is not going to do it.
So I want to finish with you, Brian, because Johnson Controls has a long history of engineering, data, science, and you were sharing with us earlier that you guys are actually taking a very data-driven approach at trying to understand culture and behaviors, and that, quite frankly, you're having some challenges.
That's right. So I'm sure it's probably no surprise to the audience here. I mean, Johnson Controls has been under a significant amount of change over the last several months. We're in the process of separating our automotive business into its own publicly traded company. We've announced a merger with Tyco that obviously has been in the news. And, when you look at these issues, they put strain and stress and pressure on your culture. I mean, so in order to get after that piece of it, We've been looking at everything from our employee engagement survey results. I think we heard from GE this morning, trying to understand what is the data coming out of our engagement survey results telling us. And to be quite frank, we get some mixed signals. We're not quite sure that the engagement survey in and of itself is a good predictor, good indicator in every case. In some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. We're also working on rolling out cultural surveys, where we will go into targeted business units in specific areas, not necessarily because we have a concern, but we want to know more about, again, that informal system. What are employees actually seeing day to day in their operations? What are they hearing from their managers and their leaders? And in addition, we've also recently rolled out an ethical leadership model to really get after what everyone is referring to as tone in the middle. Again, I think it's good to talk about tone at the middle, but I think what people and compliance professionals really want are what are those concrete action items that companies can do, that compliance professionals can do to actually influence culture, influence behaviors. And so what this ethical leadership model is very focused at our middle leadership, that direct manager and supervisor. It takes the three core behaviors of personal integrity, role modeling, and team and performance management, and it lays that across the expectations of a leader from both a development standpoint, communication standpoint, as well as an accountability standpoint. So to just give you an example, it creates a 3x3 matrix. And with that matrix, we can now go into specific programs, specific formal programs that we run day in and day out across our entire organization. And we can try to think and put in place things that tie into this concept of ethical leadership and how to influence behavior. And I'll just give you a quick example. So if you think about your talent acquisition process, right? Very simple. And we all talk about, well, let's not hire the bad apples to begin with. Well, what does that mean? I'm a firm believer that integrity and ethical behavior is like any other type of competency. You can screen for it. You can recruit for it. Is it 100% perfect? No. But if it stops one bad apple from joining your organization, that's a pretty good indicator. So what we're doing is we're first working with our leadership talent acquisition team to embed specific questions that the hiring manager or somebody on the hiring interview team will start asking prospective candidates. And that does two things for you. The first is it sends a very strong message to your potential candidates that you take the value of integrity seriously. You're very focused on your values. You want responsible, ethical people joining your organization. The second thing that it does is it sends a broader communication to the broader candidate pool that this is something that your company values. That's just one small example. Again, you can go across the 3x3 matrix and talk about your strategic talent review process. You can talk about promotions. You can talk about, and we've heard a lot of compliance professionals talk about, how do I hardwire, right, ethical performance into our performance management processes and systems. And by the way, none of this is easy. And there's no magic bullet here. There's no one single thing we're going to do. It's just like our formal compliance program. There's no one single thing we're going to do as an organization that's necessarily going to change the culture overnight. It's a long-term process. We've been at it for 130 years. I expect to be at it for another 130 years. And we continuously learn. And some of the things we're going to try, you know what? They're not going to tell us anything. The data is going to come back, and we're going to go, yep, that wasn't work. That didn't help us. Let's move on to the next thing. But I think it's that kind of mindset of let's just stop talking about tone. Let's actually get after specific concrete action items that we can do, and let's learn from that and continuously improve our programs.
Fantastic way to end this discussion. I could keep going, but the red light of death has been flashing for the past 5 minutes. So I'm going to thank you very much, Brian, Bob, Amin, and Melissa, for a really, really great conversation.